back to my channel. So today's video is one that hits a little bit close to home because it actually happened and I've watched it unravel in the past couple of years in my home state, and that is the disappearance of James Martin Roberts. Now, this case is definitely odd, and it's one that you are going to have to open your mind to, and at the end of this video I'm going to explain a question that I feel like a lot of people have had, not just in this video. I know you guys will have it in this video, but also in a few of my other videos, and I'm hoping it'll give you a little bit of understanding and compassion for situations like these. So before I get into way too much rambling, let's just go ahead and dive into today's video. Now, Martin was 19 years old when he went missing from Boone, North Carolina on April 21st, 2016. So just a little over 2 years ago. He lived off of King Street in Boone in an apartment with 3 of his fraternity brothers, and he seemed to be getting a really good hold on his life. Martin had attended Appalachian State University, and throughout this video, because I'm a local, my sister went there, you know, very close place to my heart, I'm either going to call it App or ASU, so it's just kind of something that we say in North Carolina, so I won't call it all of Appalachian State University this entire time. But he went to App, and with his new freedoms of being a freshman, as most freshmen do, it got to him just a little bit. So he seemed a lot more focused on his fraternity and having fun, his social life, and he let his grades really slip. So after his first year, he decided, and I guess his family decided, that it would be best if he took some time off to gather himself. So Martin took about 6 months off. He took this entire time to work full-time. He moved back in with his parents. I think they lived in Kernersville. I'm pretty positive. I'm also not positive how far that is away, but I do know he essentially uprooted himself from Boone and went back to live with his family. And the goal of this was that he could save some money, get his mind back on track, and hopefully by the spring semester go back to Boone. And that's exactly how it worked out. So by the first of the year, Martin moved back to Boone, and he actually decided to start taking some classes at a community college because he really wanted to fix his GPA because he had done some damage to it his first year, and he also was thinking about getting a part-time job. He was basically doing what he could to kind of get back on track and maintain being on track while still being in Boone. And by all accounts, this was going great. He was getting good grades again, he was meeting with advisors, he was right on track to get back into App. So just a few days before Martin disappeared, he spoke to his father, and he seemed completely normal and he seemed in great spirits. He was so excited to hopefully be starting back at App in the fall. He was excited about new living arrangements. From what I could see, he planned to finish up his semester, go back home for the summer, and then come back in the fall, be in a new apartment, and be going back to Appalachian State. So that was the plan, and he was speaking to his dad about this. They were talking about him saving up money over the summer to pay for some of these accommodations. And also, from what it seems, I feel like his family really was trying to get him set on the right track. Martin's parents seemed to really make sure he was on a strict budget, make sure he was making his own money, make sure that he was a part of the different processes of moving and understanding things to essentially set him up for successful independence. So it was a pretty average conversation about being excited about the following semester, and Martin and his dad were supposed to speak the following Tuesday or Wednesday, and the phone call happened on a Monday, the Monday before he disappeared. And Tuesday came and there was no phone call from Martin. Wednesday came, Martin wouldn't respond to any text messages to his dad, and by Thursday, Martin's dad had no idea that anything could possibly be wrong with his son or that his son went missing. So he was actually getting a little bit aggravated and thought that maybe Martin was slipping again and, you know, avoiding phone calls with his dad because they always talked about his plans and his future, and he didn't think much of it. But by Friday morning, Martin still hadn't responded, and at this point, his dad was alarmed. So he decided he was going to reach out to anyone he could in Boone since him and his family didn't live there. And unfortunately, he didn't have the numbers for any of Martin's roommates, but he did have the number for the landlord. So Martin's dad called the landlord and said, "Look, I can't get in contact with my son. I don't have any of the numbers for his roommates. Will you please get in contact with them and see if they can check on Martin and have him contact me? So obviously the landlord relayed this information to the roommates, and the roommates and Martin's dad were all thinking the same thing. Maybe his phone broke, or has just been dead. Maybe he just went off to stay with somebody else. Nothing really bad was crossing their mind until the roommates went to check Martin's room. So Martin wasn't in his room, and no one had been in there since presumably when Martin had, and no one was even sure when that was. What they found was that Martin had left everything behind. His cell phone was there, all of his other important personal belongings were there, and there was a note. And this note was laying face down on his bed on top of a random pile of his belongings. It was very obvious that Martin wanted somebody to find it. Now, this note has never been released for very similar reasons to the Mason Smith case, and everything about these two cases, the Mason Smith case and this Martin Roberts case, are eerily similar. And I know you guys are going to say that nonstop in the comments. Authorities have seen it and said there is nothing really in it that has led them to where he went or what exactly happened. And if Martin is out there somewhere, releasing this note because it is so personal could embarrass him and just stop him from coming home even further. So they haven't released the note, and I think that's very respectful of Martin. But his father has said the gist of the letter, and Martin basically spoke of wanting to start over. He says that he is very disappointed in himself. He says that he's sorry. He goes on to say that he feels like he didn't take advantage of any of the opportunities that were given to him. And this kind of goes hand in hand in the idea that I have through looking at this information, that his family really went above and beyond to set him up for success. And from what he's saying in this letter and his actions, it seems like he wouldn't really fully latch onto those opportunities. And he was 19 years old. That's not all that surprising, but maybe it put a lot of expectations on him. Not necessarily that anyone else had put on him, but he had put on himself, and basically it had just become way too much for him. He said that he wished he could have been more successful in school and really pushed himself to excel, but he feels like he just blew it. And he also said that he was leaving, but he never said where he was going to. He never said in what context necessarily he was leaving, just that he was. Overall, it was a very vague letter. It gave no information to authorities or his family. When his friends kept searching the room, they actually ended up finding an original version of this letter that had been crumpled up and thrown in the trash. And when someone writes a letter and leaves a letter before disappearing, sometimes it's just being frantic and they say a lot of things that they don't necessarily mean. But this was a clear letter with intent behind it. He had already tried to write it one time and wasn't getting across the message that he wanted to. So because he wrote it more than one time and that was the version that was there, it's pretty safe to say that that's exactly what he wanted to say in that moment. When Martin's roommate found his room in the state, he had left his phone behind, his iPad, his laptop, this really cryptic letter. They first called authorities to tell them that their roommate was missing, and then they called Martin's dad. And I think they actually had to go to the landlord first to get Martin's dad's number, to then call Martin's dad. And all their ideas that he had maybe just gone off with, you know, like a girl for a couple of days or broken his phone, they really realized how serious this was. So Martin's dad grabbed his wife and they immediately headed off to Boone. When they further looked into his room for any signs of something, they realized that Martin's fridge was empty, and he did have a fridge in his room separate from everyone else's fridge. And I know this sounds like a really small bit of information, but it really comes into play when I get into the theories. But basically 2 days before he disappeared, so just 2 days, one of his friends finished up class and then took Martin to go get his hair cut and go to the grocery store because Martin didn't have a car and he was relying on all of his friends to drive him all the different places that he needed to go. He didn't even have a bike, so it was his friends using the public bus or nothing. And His friend took him to get groceries, and Martin got a couple of bags of groceries. So he got enough to at least last quite a few days, but somehow 2 days later, the entire fridge was empty. So everything at this point was incredibly baffling, but authorities did not hesitate to jump right into this case. I am so proud of Boone Police Department because it's very rare these days where we cover a case where a police department has just shocked me and gone above and beyond, and I'm so happy that it just so happens to be a police department in my state. But the first weekend was filled with endless attempts to find Martin. Authorities immediately put Suzanne's law into use, and Suzanne's law basically lets people Martin's age, 19 years old, I think it's 18, 19, and 20, go into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children when normally they wouldn't be able to. And that also allows authorities to use the resources that the National Missing Center for Exploited Children, that's a mouthful, basically will give to people who are in their database. So that's already one thing that was absolutely amazing. And then the authorities did a reverse 911 call to all the property owners in the area. So I haven't really spoken on what Boone is like, necessarily the terrain. Boone is in the middle of the mountains. Like, Boone is very high up. It is a mountain town. It's primarily a college town. I think over half the population is college students, and terrain is rough, and there's different ski resorts all around Boone. There's different, attractions all around the outskirts of Boone, and a lot of people vacation there, and they have these houses, these cabins, these big pieces of property, and they don't necessarily stay at this property all the time because Boone, again, is a very seasonal place. Normally people go there to go to college, which isn't all year, or they go to ski. So summer and springtime, which is right around the time that all this was happening, normally things are quieting down a lot in the town. So they were hoping that by doing this reverse 911 call to property owners, they would maybe alert people who didn't live at these actual cabins to come and check them out. Because there is this thing, and I don't know if, I'm sure everybody has it, but we call it cabin surfing. And basically, because a lot of the cabins in the area are very seasonal properties, there's not always someone living in them. So if they're easy to get into or they have great outbuildings, a lot of transients or part of the homeless population will kind of go from cabin to cabin in this off season mainly and live there essentially because no one else is. And they were wondering if maybe Martin was cabin surfing. Authorities also decided to use helicopters with infrared, wondering if maybe Martin had gone out to one of the many trails in the area, because that is another huge reason people go to North Carolina mountains, is that there's the Appalachian Trail, there's all sorts of different waterfalls and other levels of nature trails, and they were wondering, maybe he went there to stay off of the radar. So they were hoping by using the infrared, they could look for any sign of a fire that was currently happening or maybe had happened in the past couple of hours. But unfortunately, there was absolutely no sign of him anywhere on these trails. And all of these searches, it's very different than searching anywhere else because they all had to be searches of intention. The terrain in Boone, I can't even, if you've ever been on the Blue Ridge Parkway or been to Boone, you know what it's like. This particular area is dangerous as crap. Like, you could be driving on a road and all of a sudden both sides of the road, just drop out because you're just riding on a ridge that's narrow, you can barely fit your car down it. And there are so many cliffs, so many waterfalls, there's a ton of wildlife out there, and the vegetation is just so thick. And at this point, everything was really starting to come in for the spring. So you could be standing on the road, walk 10, not even 10 feet into the forest off of the side of the road, and everything there is so thick and you don't know where you're going because it's just so dense that either A, you could fall off a cliff you didn't know was there, or B, you probably couldn't even see the road just a few feet away from it. So it's not like they had a lot of opportunity to go and just do widespread random searches, because it just wasn't logical. And even the searches that they did do, because everything was so dense, they could have walked only a few feet away from something that might have been assigned to what happened to Martin or where he was, and they might have missed it. It's just a very difficult area to search. So they also started looking at surveillance, because it's a college town. CCTV is absolutely everywhere, and this actually led them to the last known sighting of Martin. So Martin was actually seen that Thursday on the 21st. So this is his last known time of being in Boone. And remember that that following Friday is when he was reported missing, and they realized he had left all of his things behind. So this sighting was confirmed from surveillance, and this is the only confirmed sighting of Martin since he disappeared. So around 12:30 p.m. that day, Martin was walking on the other side of the street at a main bus stop in Boone. It was at the intersection of Hardin Street and River Street. He had a backpack on him, but the backpack wasn't even completely full. It looked like he maybe had a few items in it. It definitely wasn't enough for him to have packed like survival gear or camping gear. And on top of that, he didn't own any of that. He only had, I think it was a hammock, like a portable hammock, and that's absolutely it. So he didn't have a lot of things in his backpack that made it seem like he was about to go away for a long period of time. And when he was walking on the road, he actually saw waiting at the bus stop a friend of his. And I've also seen and heard that this was his cousin. Not 100% sure on this. In the Vanished podcast, his dad said it was a friend and disappeared. It was a cousin, not sure. So Martin went across the street to talk to her, and they had a conversation. You could see from the different buses that were passing by and CCTV that they appeared to be having just an average conversation. And then she eventually got on a bus, and when she got on the bus, he walks away, and that is the last time he was seen. The next time a bus comes that way, you don't see him walking, you don't see him get on a bus, absolutely nothing. So obviously they tried to figure out what this conversation was about, because this was the last time that they knew of that anyone had spoken to Martin. And if he was planning on running off or something, you would assume there would be some sort of sign in his conversation surrounding the time where he decided to run off. And it was almost exactly like the phone conversation he had with his dad just days before. They talked about him returning to App State in the fall. They talked about the classes he was planning on taking, how excited he was. They talked about his friends. They talked about his new apartment and that he had put a deposit on his apartment, and you know, that he was so ready. And there was not a single sign to this person that he was about to do anything or planning on running away. It just seemed completely normal. And then there was a possible second sighting of Martin again later on in the day, but this sighting has never been confirmed. Apparently someone that knew Martin was driving on the Blue Ridge Parkway area in the outskirts of town, and there is an area where a lot of college students and locals go to hang out. It's like a swimming hole, lake, trail type of area called Trout Lake, and Martin had actually been there quite a few times, and this person was driving past it and saw someone that appeared to be Martin walking down the side of the road, looking like he was going towards that area. Because there was no physical proof, they couldn't really ever confirm it. It could not be substantiated at all. But despite that, they still went to search this area because, again, as I said, authorities went above and beyond. They completely searched the swimming hole. They searched the trail surrounding it. They searched the swimming hole. I think, don't quote me on this, that they eventually went back and dredged it. I could be wrong. It could be a different body of water, but I know for a fact that they did go and search the lake. They had a boat with sonar. They had divers. They had cadaver dogs. They searched absolutely everything. And authorities were a little bit worried because the area of Trout Lake and the direction he was seen heading in would have led him straight to the Appalachian Trail. And if you're not familiar with it, which I'm sure a lot of you are, this trail is a very, very long, very intense trail. Like, an average everyday Joe doesn't just walk up on the trail and decide to go and hike it, because it takes a lot of preparation. I mean, a lot of people do practice hikes to get ready for this trail, and it worried authorities, obviously, because it didn't appear as if he took anything to be potentially prepared for that sort of hike. So they searched all of that, and then they even went out of their way to search the different areas in the town that were notorious for people ending their life. And as unfortunate as that is, with the terrain, it's a big deal up there. You know, it's very easy. There are so many cliffs, there are so many waterfalls, so many terrifying things, and people do oftentimes gravitate to these very specific spots to end their life. And despite the searches, though, I will say that Martin wasn't found at any of these places. Authorities were scrambling at this point to find any leads on Martin, because in a place like Boone, while there is a huge opportunity for you to get lost in the woods, the fact that he had somehow managed to disappear and just not really leave a trail behind was very alarming. And again, though, the authorities just blew my mind because they tried everything. They contacted the parents every single day, if not multiple times a day. They listened to the parents' theories. They were willing to take in and absorb and consider every possible option. And they even reached out to other police departments. And that is unheard of, honestly. And then they started realizing a very, very strange portion of his disappearance. And this, to me, holds all the clues as to what exactly happened to Martin, where he went. Maybe I'm crazy, but I always tend to gravitate towards a part of a story that seems like the answers are in, and I am telling you right now, I swear this is it. So in the process of looking into the weeks before Martin's disappearance, for obvious reasons like checking to see if anyone saw any sign that he was going to run away, or that he wanted to end his life, or that he was putting himself in a dangerous position to possibly end up a victim of foul play, they actually started noticing that he had huge chunks of his time that were unaccounted for. He would go totally off the radar. And this is so interesting to me. So he had a bunch of different groups of friends. He had a group of friends from high school. He had a group of his fraternity brother friends. Even I think his fraternity was split up into a different couple of cliques. He had other people he met in school. So he had a good handful of different groups of friends. And in these time periods where he would go invisible, basically, he would always tell this group of friends that he was with this group of friends. And at the same time, he would tell this group of friends that he was with this group of friends. And if anyone asked what he was doing, he sometimes would say he had been specifically hanging out with a very specific person a lot lately. And they were doing this, and they were doing that, and they were playing basketball. And he would change that specific person up every once in a while of who he was hanging out with. And while at the moment none of this seemed odd, none of these people were ever checking with any of the other people to see if this was true. And once authorities started questioning the friends and going through their normal rounds of the people closest to him, all these people were like, wait a minute, you know, he said he told this group that he was with this group, but he wasn't with either of them. And the person he was playing basketball with and apparently seeing a lot lately hadn't seen him since right when he got home. So he was saying all of these things, but he wasn't really with anybody, and not a single person knew where else he would have been, because they all gave him rides. He had no car, he had no bike. It was bizarre. His family was wondering if maybe he was embarrassed because he was taking community college classes, and maybe he just didn't want his friends to know, or they said maybe he was embarrassed that he didn't have a car. But the thing about this is that I'm sure at this point his friends knew that. You know, he lived with 3 of his fraternity brothers who probably talked a lot to their other fraternity brothers, which was a huge portion of his friends. And if he lives with them and he's, you know, taking classes at a community college and he's relying on them for rides, you know what I mean? I feel like there's not really any way there could have been this secrecy there. I could totally be wrong, but they obviously knew he didn't have a car, so I don't understand how he would be embarrassed about that. But then to make it even more weird, which really strays me away from the idea that he was just embarrassed during these time frames, is that when he would go missing for these periods of time, he would leave absolutely no electronic trail. So he would have all of this activity, and then for an undisclosed amount of time, because they've never stated how long it was, silence. No one knew where he was. All of his friends thought he was with other friends, but he wasn't really with anybody, and he wasn't using his phone, he wasn't using his iPad, he wasn't using his laptop, nothing. And then all of a sudden, he would pick back up like nothing ever happened. However, according to some of his friends, his phone was actually broken, and his father has said that this isn't something too uncommon with him. He never wanted a case, he never wanted any of that, so he would sometimes break his phone. So normally he would have to rely on his iPad, and obviously for most iPads, and his in specific, he had to have Wi-Fi in order to use it. So maybe these periods of time he just wasn't connected to Wi-Fi. I don't know. There's still just something very, very strange about this, and this was randomly happening for weeks. And if he just didn't have Wi-Fi, why did he also just go and lie to his friends? It's just kind of too much information that's questionable to make it seem like it's easily explainable by loss of Wi-Fi or that he was embarrassed. So authorities wanted to try to really nail down what Martin was doing in these time periods, because they could potentially hold a lot of information about what exactly happened when he disappeared. So they went out and sent letters to the community asking for someone to come forward if they saw Martin at one of these time periods, where exactly he was, in hopes for answers. And despite many different leads and bits of information coming in, nothing ever answered that question. When they realized that all of his electronics went silent in these time frames, they decided to really start looking into his internet activity and his emails, hoping that maybe they contained some clues. Because while the public might not have seen them, he might have talked to somebody about them, or maybe searched something or GPS something before going. But they only found one strange search from Martin, and it was from a month before he disappeared, like almost down to the day. Martin had searched what it took to become a member of the military, to join the military, and he also looked up exercises to prepare to be in the military. So now authorities are wondering, what if he ran off to join the military and he just didn't tell anybody? They had found his bank card, and his bank and everything had remained untouched. I think they found it in between his sheets or something on his bed, and they also found a fake ID that he had, but the one thing that was unaccounted for was his real ID. And they didn't even know for sure if he had it or if he had lost it, or if, you know, they just hadn't found it yet. But they figured maybe he took this to successfully become a part of the military, so they checked with all the resources that they could, all the different branches, and he never signed with anyone that they know of. So now they're really back to square one, but the one thing that him searching this said is that he wanted to do something more. He clearly wasn't 100% content with what he was doing. We already know his letter had said that he felt like he was disappointing everybody, he was disappointing himself, he wanted to try something new, he wasn't doing good in school, he felt like he was letting everyone down. So maybe he thought the military was a great option, but then maybe he got scared of that and, you know, picked a different option and was just off somewhere doing whatever that may be. So now all authorities really had was just researching all of these places they had already searched and continuously going over all of the information all over again. There were a ton of sightings of Martin, but here's the catch when it comes to these sightings of Martin. I said before there was only one confirmed one, and that is because Martin dressed the exact same way, had the exact same hair, acted the exact same way, walked the exact same way as majority of the young men in Boone that went to Appalachian State. You guys know, usually groups of friends all end up dressing the same. This is absolutely no exception. One of the officers that went to interview the fraternity brothers about this whole situation said when he walked in the house, there were at least 3 of them that he would have sworn at a quick glance that they were Martin, because they were all wearing almost the exact same outfit Martin was when he went missing. He was wearing, I think, a black t-shirt, an Appalachian State windbreaker, khaki pants, shoes, socks, and like a white golf visor. And every single one of these frat guys wore that outfit at some point in time, and if you didn't know him, you would assume half the people you saw on the street were him. So all of these possible sightings were coming in, but almost every single one of them were ruled out because it was just another guy on campus. They even started to wonder about all of the people on TV from the different TV shows. I know you're gonna know what I'm talking about. The ones that live off grid, and I can't remember the name of the TV shows. There's a handful of them at this point, and a lot of them actually live near Boone. We've got a lot of off the grid people in our country slash mountainside, and I find it interesting when I got to this part of the story. I actually have been thinking this the entire time, and I think it's interesting that they kind of made the connection too. But it's actually a very common thing here because the weather isn't too severe. You know, it's pretty mild in the summer. We definitely get a lot of snow in our mountains in the winter, but it's still nothing compared to a lot of places. So it's very easy to live off grid. So authorities and his family maybe wondered if, you know, he saw these TV shows, he knew these locations, so maybe he went out to these people to ask for help living off grid. So they actually went and talked to all of these different people living in their little communities and asked if maybe they had seen Martin or if they had helped him. All of them were very honest and forthcoming and said, you know, there was no way they were going to help a 19-year-old kind of run away from his family. They hadn't helped anybody. And they even went to places in Asheville that are kind of like subculture groups. And Asheville, North Carolina is very, very close to Boone. And these subculture groups, there's a ton of them there, and authorities went to all the different leaders, and those leaders as well said, we always encourage people to explore this idea and this group that we have, but we always tell them it's best to speak with their families about it before coming and joining and just kind of dropping off the radar because they don't want to be held accountable for anything. So again, none of these groups knew about Martin, so it was just another dead end. I decided to check all of the different homeless shelters because that could have been a great place for him to fly under the radar. He would be taken care of for the most part. He would have a roof over his head, food given to him, but because of a lot of the privacy policies, they obviously couldn't get any information. So he could technically be in some of these homeless shelters, but there's nothing that authorities can do. And the different homeless shelters did offer to put up his flyer, but that was pretty much all they could help with. And on top of that, Martin had a very strict budget, and he actually didn't have full control over his bank account. His family did. I think it was his dad. And I think they said he had maybe $5 in his bank account before he left. He really didn't have a lot of money, and he didn't make any big withdrawals before he went missing, right when he went missing, or after. And his family said because of their monitoring of his money and his budget, there's not really any way he could have had a lot of cash on him. You know, maybe if he somehow managed to get some cash, at most it would be like $100 to $200, but they don't even think he would have had that. Another year has gone by and they haven't really had any more information come in with the case. This is not a case where there hasn't been any sort of leads, but nothing has been a significant lead, and most things have been ruled out fairly quickly. So now we're kind of into the theory portion of this video. So there's a couple very solid theories, and then these theories have like sub-theories, if that makes sense. But there's because there's such little information, there's so much room for possibilities, and people have just gone crazy online over this case. So if you're interested in more theories, definitely go check this out online. Definitely leave your theories down below. Authorities in this case seem to want to hear these things. They want to hear these possibilities because they've tried and they've tried and they've gone over things. And, you know, it even actually got to the point where they were communicating with Western University, a local college, different college from Appalachian State, and they were going to have their criminology students do a what did they call it? A mass case study on Martin's case to get that many different eyes on this information. They're just really willing to take in everyone's thoughts and opinions. So definitely leave them down below by any off chance that they'll see this. They actually might, because they listened to the Vanish podcast, and they actually went on to the Vanish podcast. If you're interested in that, I have it linked down below. But anyways, there's a ton of theories out there. definitely go dive into them if you want to, but I only really have time for a couple of the large ones. So the first one is that he ran off for a new life and just somehow hasn't popped up anywhere. Now, this is a likely scenario, and his letter did say he was going to leave, just not to where. But his parents had his passports, so it would have been very difficult, not impossible, but difficult for him to get out of the country. And on top of that, Boone, again, is in the middle of nowhere. You know, you would really have to either hitchhike or go out of your way, maybe use the Appalachian Trail to jump from like town to town, but it would be, again, quite the hurdle. He was active, he did camp, he knew how to be outside, but he didn't know how to live off the land really, or take care of himself for an extended period of time, especially alone on the mountain. He also didn't have a ton of money on him, and that pretty quickly rules out public transportation. Some people even theorize that he maybe went off to work in a cannabis farm in California, or, you know, somewhere else. I don't know where exactly they're getting this idea. Maybe this is something he's expressed his interest in once before. But again, how would he have gotten there without transportation? And it would have taken a significant amount of transportation to even get off of the mountain from where he is. So I don't know. It's just, it's very, very confusing. It makes you wonder if he did have help along the way, and this person's just really kept the secret to themselves. So another thing with this runaway theory, and this is something that I think is highly, highly likely, and that I thought about from the very beginning, is that his fridge was empty, and he had just done a pretty large shopping trip just 2 days before. And I'm assuming none of this food was found in the trash, because they did feel the need to state it. Didn't say they found it anywhere, just said it was odd that his fridge was empty. And I'm wondering if one of those times that he went off the radar was in between going grocery shopping with his friend and when he went missing. Because when I think of all of these chunks of time where he kind of went invisible, I wonder if he maybe was preparing a space. I said before, there's a lot of cabins that are not in use, but on top of that, there's also a lot of abandoned cabins and shacks, and like just driving up to Boone, you'll see like old barns and rundown tiny little old homes deep in the woods from who knows how long ago, that's just randomly either on someone's property or, you know, near the edge of the road, and no one ever goes in it, no one ever checks it. So what if he was slowly taking items and stocking a little house with it, you know, a little cabin somewhere? We know that when he left that day with his backpack, it definitely probably wasn't full enough to carry all of the remaining groceries. So I honestly think something might have happened between those two time periods where he went and took all of that food somewhere so that he could survive. One idea kind of branched off of this also is that he went on the Appalachian Trail, whether that was to get to another town or whatever, just for the fun of it. But I don't know how likely this theory is, again, because it's very, very difficult to be on the Appalachian Trail, whether it's cold or if it's, you know, summertime outside. It's just a very rough, rigorous trail. And again, he had no experience hiking like that. And he also didn't have access to any equipment that he would have needed. And because his money was tracked so closely, there's really not a lot of room there, wiggle room, for him to have gone off and got things on his own. His family doesn't want to put any of this past him, and I also don't think it's that far-fetched, because the Appalachian Trail has different entrances and exits, and a lot of them are in small little towns all throughout the mountains. And if he just needed to get from one town to another, it might have been a rough, difficult journey for him. I don't think it would have necessarily been impossible, especially if he had been stashing, you know, things to eat and things like that for a couple of weeks. I don't know. I think it could be possible. Now, the next theory is that he wanted to end his life. And being the area that it is, I don't think that's, again, out of question. And it could be very difficult to find his body if this is the case. You know, a hiker might come across him, a hunter might come across him, but so far, no one's really found any sign of him at all, and it's been about 2 years. And his dad brought up a very interesting, you know, bit of information on the Vanish podcast, that there was one young woman who disappeared in the same sort of area, and they actually found her in a place that they had already searched multiple times. But again, because everything is so thick there, it's like you could pass by someone just a few feet away from you and just never find them because you just can't see them. My biggest thing about this is that in his letter, he seems very upset that he couldn't do better. And it seems from his search about the military and, you know, trying community college and getting a job and working for months, he was trying to think of ways to do better and ways to be successful. I just don't see him going off and giving up if letting people down bothered him as badly as he made it seem like it did. I see him going off and figuring another way out faster than I assume he went to end his life to just say forget it. Obviously, I don't know him personally. I don't know a ton about his character, but that's just the impression that I'm given off of the information that I have gone through. His parents have said openly that they do not care why he left. They don't care what exactly happened. They just want to know that he's safe. And obviously their end goal is to have Martin come home to them and figure this all out. But they've even said that if he doesn't want to, that's fine. And they respect that. They just want to know he's okay. Like if they could just get a phone call or something from him saying, I'm fine, I'm figuring myself out. As long as they know he's alive and well, they can take a deep breath. They can sleep a little bit better at night. It's just a heartbreaking situation, and his family has tried so hard and been so strong and patient, and the authorities have as well. I mean, the FBI has been involved, the state level government's been involved, the city level government's been involved. Everyone's just been working so well together, and it's almost frustrating that in most cases that's not what happens. And you always say, well, if everyone worked together and did this and did that, answers would come, a person will be brought home. And to see that even in these circumstances, sometimes that's just not what happens, and here we are 2 years later, it's frustrating. And I can see that it would get a lot of people down. But I also really wanted to touch on a point that I heard Marissa talk about in the Vanished podcast on this case. She brought up a question that everyone had after her first episode on Martin released, and it was that a lot of people questioned why authorities and Martin's family were trying so hard and doing so much to find him when it was obvious that he wanted to be gone. Like, he wanted to run away. He made this choice. And I've received this comment a countless amount of times, especially on the Mason Smith case. And what I want to say is that you can't ever assume what has happened to somebody. You can't assume that you know someone's actual intent, especially if you don't personally know them. And even if you do personally know them, we talk about all the time that people will surprise you. People are in situations where they're not thinking straight. You know, even if they left a note saying that they wanted to leave, you can't assume that even after they left that they remained safe. And what if they walked out of the door with this intent to leave, and while leaving, they became a victim of foul play or some major accident happened for them, and because you're not looking for them, they might never be found. Truth of the matter is that there could be underlying issues or things putting them in danger, or they could be going through something mentally that's causing them to make rash, irresponsible decisions that they wouldn't normally make. And they could have gone off thinking that's what they wanted, and that's not actually the case, and they could come into harm's way or be lost or confused, and you just might not know about it. Or the statement itself that they wanted to leave could have been a cry for help. How many times have you in a situation been, you know, maybe angry or upset and said something that you totally didn't mean? How would you feel if everyone based all of your actions and intentions on that false statement you made in a time of distress? Do you see what I'm saying here? While someone may say they want to go, there's so many different reasons why this could be an emergency and not all right. Willingness to leave doesn't guarantee someone's okay, period. That's just how it is. And the way authorities handle it is if they can't get into contact with someone, that person's missing. And if family can't get into contact with someone, that person is missing. you know, we do have a right to go. And if authorities do find this adult and this adult says they want to be gone, that person's not missing anymore. The family's told, it is what it is, and everyone moves on. But until there's solid information pointing to the safety of someone, you cannot assume that that person is fine. And I feel like this is a major misconception because we all want to be free. We all want to be able to do what we want to do, but you can't just assume that about everybody because that is such a dangerous thing to assume until you have physical contact with someone stating that they're safe and they just wanted to go. Martin's family, as I said, just wants to know that he is safe and that he is fine, whether that means he wants to stay away or come home. And there is such a high chance in this case that he is out there somewhere. And their biggest thing is getting this information past North Carolina. And granted, the Vanish podcast has covered this. Disappeared has done an episode on this. There's always going to be people who haven't heard of this case before, and that's one of the largest reasons that I really wanted to cover this case, because he could be out there anywhere. He really could be. He could be flying under the radar, being paid under the table, living a transient life. And if that's what he wants to be doing, that's fine. But until his family knows he's safe and authorities know he's safe, they will constantly be searching for him. And I want everyone else to keep an eye out as well. So definitely share his story to anybody you possibly can. Share his missing persons poster. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Martin's story. Leave all your theories down below. You can put in anonymous tips or just call regular tips in at numbers I have in my description box. And don't forget to subscribe, you guys, to become a part of the Hallan fam so we can bring them home together. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.